Alright guys, welcome back. So we're going to be picking up exactly where we left off yesterday and finish milling off these two big boards behind me here. So I left the shop in a little bit of a disaster yesterday. I don't normally like leaving it this way in the evenings because, when you come back in the morning, it's an absolute mess. But because I know we're going to be making another massive mess right now when we finish milling these two boards, I decided not to clean it up. So in case you guys missed yesterday's video, what we started by doing is milling these boards that are 86 inches long by 12.5 inches wide. These are going to be the side rails of this king-size bed frame that we're building, and they came out looking awesome. So much better than I ever thought they were going to. I thought there was going to be a lot more sapwood content on these front faces here, so I'm super happy with how they look. Now, one thing I do want to point out is that they look completely different. This is one of those things you have to watch out for with walnut. You can see that this one is a much darker overall color with more black streaks through it. Overall, it's a very different piece of wood. Whereas this one is much lighter overall and definitely has more purple tones to it. So luckily these are going to be on either side of a king-size bed, so you're not ever going to see them side by side like we have them now. But that is one of those things to watch out for when working with walnut, is that it can look very, very different just depending on what board you choose. So now that we have one perfectly flat face on both of these boards, what we can do is we can load it back up in that router sled that we milled, and we can actually use that to thickness both of these down to that 1 3/4 thickness that we need. So we need to first start by cleaning out the sled here. I left all that sawdust in there from yesterday. So we're going to get that cleaned out. We're going to load these pieces up and just start taking material off. So it's going to be pretty simple because they have a flat face. We just lie them directly on the MDF. No shimming should be needed. Then we just start hitting them with the router. Alright, so using a 1, 2, 3 block and one of my Veritas setup blocks, I can make sure that this is down to the proper thickness. So the important thing here is that you want to clear out the area here. Obviously, just brushing away with your hand is not going to get all the chips out of there, so you want to vacuum that area out just like you guys saw me do. So we set the blocks down and we can see that we are at exactly 1 3/4 inch right now. And we can check that across other areas here. I did that while I was actually milling it, so I know it's all good right now. But yeah, that's the best way to go through and check this, is just with some setup blocks. You can also do it with a ruler. We can pretty easily see that we're at 1 3/4 all the way through. Now the reason I took this to 1 3/4 and I didn't leave anything oversized here is because this is going to be the size that I wanted at when I cut all of my joinery. Because this is going to be a nice precise thickness all the way across, all the way for everything else here. When we actually get around to finishing this, obviously it's going to come in just under 1 3/4 inch once we go over and hand plane the surface here. But at that point in time, all of our joinery is going to be cut, so it doesn't really matter what thickness it ends up as. But right now, as I go to try and mill that second board, I want to make sure that both of these boards are coming out at exactly the same thickness, rather than one coming out a 64th over 1 3/4 and one coming out a 32nd over 1 3/4. So it's better to be spot on a specific measurement rather than having them both close to a specific measurement. And so I really can't stress this enough. If you're in a small shop or you really want to be able to work with large boards like this, there's no better method for getting them milled up. Like, this is so much easier than trying to put this thing through my planer. Even though technically, yes, I could put it through a planer, this is easier. I'm not having to lift these boards all around. These boards, I think they probably weigh about 50 pounds each, if not a little bit more than that. So they are pretty hefty. You know, would not want to be having to carry them back and forth through the planer. Plus, the other benefit to using the router here is you can see right around this knot. If we'd put this board through the planer, we would have massive tear out all the way around here. Whereas by using the router, because it's more of a spinning cutting surface and it's removing a layer rather than the planer, which has blades going in and scooping out material, there is remarkably less tear out. So around this knot here, we have no tear out, other than obviously with a little bit of fibers came out, but that'll come out with just some simple 80 grit sanding. And again, on our little string of curls down here, there's no tear out. So if you're dealing with like really figured wood, this is going to be way better than using like a standard straight blade planer. Obviously, if you have a helical head, you're better off anyway. But if you want to work with really figured wood, you're going to want to use something like the router method here. Then you can finish it off with either a high angle blade in a low angle jack, or just sanding it would work just as well. So either way, again, this router method, absolute disaster, but it does have its perks. So before we bother cleaning the shop, there's one last thing we want to do to these boards, and that is get them to width. So I'm going to get the router jig off the workbench here. We're going to set these up with that straight edge that we cut yesterday, and then I'll be able to run my circular saw along one of these edges, get it perfectly lined up, and then we're going to have to try and figure out what we want to do on the other edge to make sure they end up mostly parallel. Okay, so surprisingly enough, my idea worked. So I wasn't able to use the straight edge that I cut, so I just grabbed the offcut piece from that big sheet, which is about 19 inches wide, so it's not going to bend and warp as I went through it. So a little quick poll, do any of you other woodworkers out there, or just anyone who makes things, ever kind of, as you're doing something, you get kind of surprised yourself, and you're like, maybe I do actually know kind of what I'm doing. Because that's exactly what I'm feeling here. It's like, I've never worked with boards this big, this heavy before, but you know, things just kind of are working out for me. So I don't want to jinx it, obviously, but it is pretty nice when things just kind of fall into place. Along with it being perfectly straight, and you know, I've checked it as best I can with all of my different straight edge abilities and that I'm kind of limited in. I've gone along the edge of both boards with my square here, and it's really not that bad. I was expecting it to be way worse. I didn't think that rigid circular saw was actually going to stay and, you know, track nice and true and stay nice and square, but it did. It really did. So it's going to be super easy to go back in and just hand plane the surface here. And even the best part of this is it's not even like a rough surface here. It doesn't even really need hand planing. So pretty much these pieces are just going to be ready to go once we cut that other side. Speaking of which, we're going to use this Krag jig again that we mount onto the circular saw, because what this will do is it'll reference this nice square edge that we just cut, and it'll give me an accurate width across both boards. So I only have to measure once, set it up on the first board, and then I know that the second board is going to come out to the exact same width. So it's all these little things that are kind of coming together. And so this is super exciting to me, because the idea that I can work with some of these bigger, beefier boards in my shop here with just the tools that I have sitting around, this is so exciting. So it's just one of those things that after the few years that I've been woodworking, all the different random tools now that I picked up, like I probably would never think about to buy something like this, but I think I needed it for some project, you know, really early on when I was still using a lot of plywood. I bought this to break down some plywood, and now I have it, and it's just proving to be a super useful thing. This was not an expensive tool to buy at all. I don't know how much it is, but it was. I remember it not being very expensive, and now it's proving to be super useful all the way around. This really is just about the coolest thing in woodworking. I was able to fully mill these boards. We mean like fully thickness to an accurate thickness, cut them to a width that's a precise width. They're exactly 12 inches. I've checked them all the way across the length here. We're all precisely at 12 inches across, all for under the cost of buying a planer. That is absolutely ridiculous in my mind. And so when I say that, I'm very serious. You know, for the price between the router, the sheet of MDF, and the circular saw jig, I guess if you want to count in the router bit, for all that stuff costs less than that DeWalt planer that I have. You can throw in the cost of the Veritas low angle jack, and you'd still be under the cost of that DeWalt planer, and you can use all of those tools to mill up any size board you want, which is pretty awesome, I have to say. It's a really interesting thing. Now, obviously, those machines have their purposes. They're a lot faster, a lot more efficient. This took a long time just to mill these two boards. If I was milling boards like this constantly, obviously I would step up my machinery because it's just a lot easier. But it's just one of those things that's so interesting, because you always hear, you know, these big-time woodworkers say, oh, you don't need much money to actually get into woodworking. Meanwhile, they have, you know, a planer that costs more than my truck. So it's one of those things where, you know, it's when you hear the big-name woodworkers talking about how you don't need much money to get started in woodworking, this is actually proof of it right here. For the cost of a router, a circular saw, and a sheet of MDF, and maybe a hand plane, you can mill any size board you want. That to me is just spectacular. Like, you could use this on any project you want, any size board you want. You could, you know, the options are limitless, and it's not expensive. What is going to be hard is cleaning the shop. There is a good inch of sawdust all over the floor. It's lovely to walk on. It's like having one of those padded mats all over the floor of the shop. But every time I walk, I just see these clouds of dust rising up. So that's why most of the time I'm wearing my dust mask, other than when I'm talking on camera, and I've got my filter running in the background. Normally I shut it off if I was running the camera, but I want to breathe in as little of this dust as possible. So that filter up there is actually getting pretty, you can see that it's actually brown with how much walnut dust it's sucked up. So that is, there's a lot of dust in here. It's going to be an absolute mess to clean up, but I'm going to get this cleaned up today, hopefully, or maybe a little bit tomorrow too. It's probably going to take a couple days of sweeping and tidying to get the shop back to a functional order. Anyways, guys, that's going to do it for this video. It's a much shorter one today. I have to go to a market later this afternoon, so I don't have as much time in the shop. So I just wanted to make sure that I got out here, finished up these boards, got a video to you guys, since we're really trying to push these daily uploads. So I do hope you guys enjoyed it. Definitely a very eye-opening video. There's some, kind of an eye-opening project for me in general. But as always, guys, I do hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one.